Bit about, I gotta start that over again. Don't worry, I'm kind of used to it. Yeah. Okay, we'll start over. How about that? Solana Medicine Buddha was actually founded by Lama Yeshe. And actually, I was living in Nepal in those days, and I'll give you a little bit of my background so that it gives maybe helps situate, why I'm teaching this class, which I think is a very, very important class for me anyway. Um, so around 1971-ish, 70, 71, well, late 60s, boy, where to start? It's too long of a history. Lama Yeshe's biography is 2 volumes thick. It's about, I can't remember how many pages. There's John Landau up in the corner there was the editor of that. Great masterpiece of a book. So it's too much to kind of say, but to give context, it's really important that Land and Medicine Buddha is one of many centers that were started originally from our monastery in Nepal, in Kopan. And that monastery roughly started in 1970. Um, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche were the founders of that monastery, along with some Western hippies that were traveling around and, still do travel around. But uh, and I ended up in Nepal in 1975, and that's where I met Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And I think for me personally, there what's important and why I thought about doing this class for many years, some years, is to try and bring people into and introduce them to a way of looking at Buddhism that was, you know, unique in the sense that Lama Yeshe's presentation of Buddhist teachings was highly unique, I would say. And so he touched the hearts and minds of so many people, and actually it was his presence, his being, that was the hook for us to get involved. Now, a lot of us, of course, when we look at, especially in those days, Tibetan Buddhism, it was very traditional. We didn't have good translators. In fact, I was in charge of training some of the translators at Kopan. So we didn't have, so the teachings that were presented to us were presented in quite a traditional sense, right? And so, but then there's this Lama Yeshe, and there were others, but who had this unique point of view and style of being able to translate the teachings in a way that were sort of modern and current for, uh, I'm going to use the word Western, but it's really not politically appropriate because it's a modern audience, right? I mean, so if I say Western or modern, I mean modern, for this new era. And so in early 1970s, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, based upon Lama Zopa Rinpoche, is this Lama here who passed away unfortunately 2 years ago, and Lama Yeshe is I can't see behind other and so there was this unique environment, traditional monastery in Nepal. And somehow, because of these 2 lamas, it was very rare to be able to study Buddhism in English because there just weren't that many translators. The other place you could go study was in Dharamsala, where the Solus Dalai Lama's the Tibetan government exile is situated. So there was some teachings going on there in English, but it was translated. And what was interesting about Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche is that they were teaching in English. Now, granted, their English was a unique style. Lama Zopa did study English formally. Lama Yeshe, I think he did on and off. I think it's just his way of really. I refer to my old friend John because he was around from the time this era as well, 1974, 75, and John is was the chief editor at Wisdom Publications, bringing a lot of Lam Yeshe's books into publication. I don't think he worked on this one, but So I want to, I'm rambling a little bit because it's really hard to contain 50 years of kind of involvement and then bring that and synthesize it in what I want to share with you and the people, other people. So what I really want to share, and I will, excuse me for being a little bit tangential for a while, but what I want to share is that it's Lama Yeshe that I want to share. And we're getting to an end of an era where there's some sense that, those of us who are students of lamas, firsthand, we're getting kind of old, and I don't know if, we gotta, what we believe very strongly is a very strong commitment to lineage in Buddhism. Okay? So it's not like you can just study the ideas of Buddhism and then make up your own teachings around it. People are doing that. People are doing that. And we're part of 135 different centers around the world under the banner of an organization called the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition. So it's a big name, but it's very important because Lama Yeshe named it Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, which means you could be an organization which could be the foundation for the development of the Mahayana tradition, right? But in the sense of preservation, it's a little tricky word because it can sound very much like very stale, right? Sort of formaldehyde-ish, right? Is that a word? Can you say formaldehyde-ish? Again, thank you. Making up words anyway, right? Um, So the preservation of Mayan tradition does not mean that we're holding something kind of in an archival way or just stashing it away and then preserving it. It actually does also means the development because to preserve it doesn't mean just to get all these teachings and put them in a safe. It's not, that doesn't preserve them. They eventually rot and they decay. So preserving them also means making them still relevant, right? So relevant, and you think of the mindset of our modern people and you think of the mindset of Tibetans, and then you go back further and think of the mindset of traditional, I don't know, in the various, you know, um, sort of other ancient cultures, starting from India, going to Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Korea, Japan, China, Southeast Asia, went all over the place, right? And now they've been coming here for some decades. Okay. So what I thought was, it's not so hard here at Land of Medicine Buddha. We do a lot of the traditional teachings, and I encourage people to come to the classes. But sometimes I feel because people haven't been able to connect with people with lamas or teachers like Lama Yeshe. There's others, but like Lama Yeshe, that I feel that they don't get the full depth and richness of what Buddhist teachings have to offer. In this case, we're talking about the Tibetan presentation of Buddhist teachings, which is just, it's like different universities. Universities, they might all teach psychology, but they teach it from their own different bent, or they might teach whatever, politics or something. So, so the 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 challenge is to bring Lama Yeshe's mindset into our lives, into our class here. And if I can share some of that, that would be the biggest thing if I can accomplish that, to just be able to share. Um, Historically speaking, Lama was born, I didn't check, I think 1935. John Landau, was it 1935? Yay. In 1935, he, like about 100,000 odd Tibetans, did escape from the Chinese invasion of Tibet that started in the 50s and was culminated in 1959 when they came in quite violently. And his Holiness Dalai Lama was encouraged then to flee. And he fled to India, became safe haven. And roughly over the years, 100,000, I think now, of course, now more, probably 120, 140,000, I don't know, fled to Nepal and India primarily. And Lama Yeshe was often asked how angry he was with the Chinese for having kicked him out of his country. He said, I was never angry with them. He said, we were very cloistered, we were very insular, and he gave us the opportunity to meet the world and to bring these precious ideas into the rest of the world. So again, even in the sense of being taken over, having your friends, family, you know, citizens tortured and killed. You'll find amongst these many of the Tibetan practitioners, they don't harbor the sense of anger and resentment. It's very interesting. I mean, just on a very, very practical level for us to see that, right? Rather than just talking about compassion and emptiness and, you know, charity and prostration. It's like, okay, we hear all that, but what about the practice? Okay. Can you imagine having your whole life destroyed, basically, or your culture destroyed? I think there were 6,000 monasteries in Tibet, roughly 6,000 before the Chinese takeover, and I think after the Cultural Revolution, there were four left standing, which are more or less made into museums. So, um, okay. I was speaking with John because he edited and worked with Lama for many years. I asked him once, what do you think was Lama Yeshe's unique quality? What was his, what drove him besides his inner realizations? And John always said he just had such a strong desire to communicate. Hence the class, Are We Communicating, Dear? Which gives me little goosebumps. To communicate because he just had this, you know, I don't know how to describe it, this sort of commitment. So everyone, and it might be an exaggeration, but I'm going to say it anyway. Everyone who met Lama. They just, so my parents, for example, my parents were typical, I mean, it's typical LA. My dad was a businessman. My mom was a housewife, those kind of things. Non-religious, In fact, my dad kind of was a little bit anti-religious. And they met Lama Yeshe a number of times. They came and visited. Oh, just quickly, I went to Nepal. I was very interested in spirituality in those days because I did all my drugs, all the psychedelics, all the stuff, LA, and then was like looking for something. I could tell that I was really looking for something, right? Something that seemed to be beyond what we are experiencing and what we're told to experience in daily life. And I think the same holds true today for many, many people, right? And so, having gone through all that, I got involved in those days. Buddhism didn't seem to be really available. So I got involved in yoga and Hinduism, and I became a yoga teacher, and I gave up drugs, and I gave up meat, and I gave up cigarettes, and I gave up all my friends. No, they gave me up. They couldn't, I was high school, they couldn't relate to what I was doing. So, so I followed that tradition for a few years, and then I had promised to go to college, which I didn't want to do. I didn't like school. But I promised my mother, and so she was very kind. She found me sort of an alternative college. There weren't many in those days, up in Olympia, Washington, Evergreen State College. And the third year, Evergreen had a year in Nepal program. I thought, interesting, Nepal, right? Where's that? And I look, oh, look, it's on the border of India. I can go in that program. I can sneak across the border and find my guru, right? Because that was our job there. So that's how I ended up in Nepal in 1975. It was a year in Nepal, and I stayed roughly till 1988. So however, because in Nepal in those days, very hard to stay. You could only stay 3 months. But I had a non-tourist student visa, so I just dragged that out. It's like the longest. I came back to the States briefly and found a master's program, Antioch, that says, yeah, you can. We have independent master's programs. So then I went back for another 10 years. It's like. Then finally, I was told maybe you should wrap this thing up. So, but yeah, so I was very, very fortunate. I went back. Lama Yeshe had asked me to come back, and well, I was having breakfast. I was very, very nervous. He invited me to breakfast. I was there a year and a half, and he invited me to breakfast, which was like, oh my God, it's like, so I'm having breakfast with him, extremely nervous, like having breakfast with the Pope or something. And so for me, and so sitting up there, and this is 1977, something, and I was about to come back to finish my semester, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I had found this rich lifestyle in Nepal, this great meaning in Buddhism. I started tutoring a few of the young monks in English, and So we're up there, and it's like I said, it was very poor country and very poor monastery. And there I was having breakfast with Lama Yeshe with, he had white bread. Now white bread, that's like the best, right? And the package says machine made bread. And I was like they were bragging about the machine made bread. Now we go to handmade bread, right? Machine made, and then there's a tin of Prutina peanut butter because I was the only kind of peanut butter came from India, and then a bottle of jam that maybe Lama brought from the West when he travels, and a couple hard-boiled eggs. I thought, wow. I mean, this is like, but I was too nervous to eat. And then finally, I got the courage up to say to him, "So what should I do now, Lama?" And then his whole demeanor changed. And for the next 9 years, when I was working, that that face he showed was the common face. I never had the bubbling one anymore. Everyone else got the bubbling one. I got the one that like looked like it was annoying him, right? And he said, "Oh, I never tell my students what to do." Because I asked, well, what should I do next? He waves me off. So I sat there for a few more minutes, and it was really uncomfortable, this silence. And then they said, "So when you return next year, I'd like you to teach my monks English." So he did tell me what to do, but he first had to put me down for asking. So just luck would have it, I found a program here, and then this independent master's program. So I went back to Nepal. I think we were established this Western Studies program for the monks. I think we were the first monastery to do that. Now, of course, maybe every monastery, everyone that can afford it, has English, social studies, math programs, science, that sort of thing. So Lama, there was a story of Lama that, again, I might get this a little bit wrong, but that when he, I think when he left Tibet, or maybe when he was in the refugee camps, he had made a prayer. We'll have to ask John, our historian, at some point. A prayer to be able to bring the Buddhist teachings to the most ignorant people on the planet. Yeah, you know, Lama didn't teach much to the Tibetans or the Himalayans. He taught mostly to the Westerners. Okay, so what I thought we could do, maybe a way of integrating Lama, I could give you a feeling of what he was like. I'm going to give you one more story I often tell. Some people who've been with me have know this story. That um, Lama, when we talk about what I really want to be able to accomplish myself and what I really want to communicate is that I don't think the the essence or the purpose of studying spirituality and Buddhism in this case, I don't think it has to do with knowing a lot of facts. I don't think it has to, there's so much content in the Buddhist teachings, and we study and we study and we study. I also don't think that it's necessarily having to do with being able to meditate really well or being able to debate really well or be able to, extract knowledge. Um, Over and over again, what seems to communicate the teachings to others is one's presence. I get really impressed over and over and over again that it's the presence of a person that is really the thing that convinces others to continue their own development. I think that, like I am a retired psychotherapist, and it was always interesting to me, our title, because I have a master's in clinical psychology. In California, you can't call yourself a psychologist. You have to have a PhD so I'm a marriage family therapist. It is always interesting to me how many of my colleagues were, you know, giving marital and counseling advice, but their lives were kind of in confusion and mess. You know what I mean? And so in the Buddhist tradition, and we talk about Buddhism, which is a funny thing because we use the word Buddhist, but we really shouldn't even use the word Buddhist, right? Because Buddhist is a Sanskrit word. In Tibet they don't use the word in Tibetan they don't use the word Buddhist. I imagine Chinese they don't use the word Buddhist and the other cultures. Buddha means awakening, right? Or Buddha is an awakened being. So really, I mean, just to be a little bit provocative, we should probably call this path the path of awakening, right? And in the path of awakening, there are awakened, fully awakened beings, which would say they attain their highest potential, which is the awakened state of mind. But there's also, I think what's encouraging, there's also awakening beings. That means beings who are on the path. And their minds, our minds, their minds are awakening. And when we look historically at the historical Buddha, his they say that from the point his mind started to awaken, which is like entering the path, to when he attained full awakened Buddhahood, full awakened state, was three countless eons. And I always forget the number, but an eon is some ridiculous amount of years, right? Um, Sometimes they say that one eon is the time it takes for a sun, a sun to be come into existence, reside, disappear, and the next one to come back. That's a lot of years, billions and billions and billions of years. I used to write down the number, but I've gotten lazy. I guess I forgot. But it's trillions of years, right, long. So it took Shakyamuni Buddha trillions of years from the point that his mind started to awaken. Okay, it doesn't mean from the point his mind started, because we have this belief, and the theory is that your mind is beginningless. So it's not that. It's when it's when your mind has begun to awaken. And it's still three eons. So, us as modern people, it's always like one of the classic things is we think we should be attaining, we meet the meditation, we meet the Buddhist teachings, and then we're wondering why we're not enlightened by in a few years. And it's a very hard thing to be patient. There's many stories about the level of patience we need. So I think it's the presence of a being who is awakening or attempting to awaken. And so there are different levels of awakening. We don't know what a person's at. We can't say, oh, is he like we do say His Holiness Dalai Lama is fully awakened. His mind is fully developed in the fully state of Buddhahood. We have other examples that maybe they're somewhere. Even the first level of awakening, the very, very first level, when one has attained insight into reality, it's not from when one starts the path. One can enter the path of awakening, but when the mind actually has a clear view of the nature of reality, which is one's own potential mind, right? From that point on, you never go backwards. You can never go back. And that person, even that person can, at that point, uh, we say, can manifest his own, he can manifest in 100 different emanations at one time. So it's a very high level. That's the very first level. So um, just from this perception of how things really exist, our job is, or our problem is we see things as they don't exist and believe that that is how they exist. That's the whole, if you want to sum up the Buddhist path, it's as simple as that. Going from where first recognizing the way we see things and they don't exist that way, then they don't then beginning to see how things do exist, then that's entering the path really of no return from happiness to happiness. Okay. So the copy that I printed out, my outline is not the right copy. Oh, also today, in the class, I don't want to I also want to have interaction and we'll do just a little bit of meditation, okay? Because that's, whenever Lama taught, just not whenever, but often when he taught, most of the time, he would often have some sort of short or some kind of meditation. So when we talk about, so one of the tasks of our organization now with Lama Zopa Rinpoche having passed away 2 years ago is we're trying to think about how to preserve Lama Yeshe and Lama Rinpoche's unique lineage. Because what they did and what they accomplished and the way they taught was very, very unique. And I want so when we talk about lineage, so I've had a lot of discussions with different people about what does that mean? What is Lama Yeshe's lineage? What is Lama Zopa's lineage? Because they taught from the texts they taught were the same texts that many, many lamas teach from. So you think, they're teaching, and then you have all these, we have their teachings recorded and printed and archived. Is that their lineage? What is a lineage? A succession of teachers. I think that's, oh, okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, so we can record it, or else people can hear it also. You're recording too, right? Yeah. Okay, okay, why don't you say yours first and then you get a second. What's that? Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, it's
I just said it was your succession of teachers in the sense of your human your teachers.
okay. So succession of teachers handing
Yeah,
it
who
through
taught
the
you
teach.
the Dharma.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Tyler.
I was saying that it's a transmission, and of what I don't know.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like really, I mean, obviously the transmission of a teaching, but what is the true essence of that teaching? Is it in the words, like you said, or can it truly just be expressed or transmitted through presence, through connection, through a communication that's beyond words?
Perfect. Yeah. Anyone practice? How we practice the teachings is what Young Chen was saying, Venerable Young Chen was saying. Yeah.
For me, it would be like how many lives he touched or his
Mm.
teachings impacted.
Oh, wow.
So it may be like in current scenario where he's not there, but still we are learning his teachings through you. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
also like our lives are impacted through that.
Right.
So I think it's just not during the time he was present, but also like after. That's the lineage that you are carrying
Right.
uh, from his teaching.
I think that all of those are true. I mean, that's how I think of it. Anyone online have a comment? No one online? Okay. Yeah, I think all of that. The one way to say it also is that the foundation, this is kind of a little tricky thing to say. Um, Interesting to me that in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and I'm generalizing, but it seems to be that the base, the very basis, is the relationship with one's spiritual teacher. That everything starts from there. That you in this tradition, one's development, and in fact, one's development and one's realizations, one's attainments, are dependent upon a relationship with a valid teacher. And so that lineage follows in that sense too. So I think that what I have been, well, just what I've noticed about having this discussion, I was just in Nepal for some time and was having this discussion with the senior lamas there and monks there and asking them. And when I asked about what was unique about Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe's lineage, what made it, that it did boil down to this one thing in particular. Their lineage, this is from the pollution in Nepal. Yeah, it's also from my karma. But um, what it distilled down to was Venerable Yangchen was alluding to was Lama Yeshe Lama Zopa Rinpoche spoke from their experience, and their experience arose from their practice, from their integration. So there was a few years ago, not that long ago, Lama Zopa Rinpoche was giving a set of teachings in the south of India, one of the big monasteries there. And monks and lamas came from all over the area to come to those teachings. I think he was teaching for about 10 days. And it was a text that was, when I say common, well-known text. Why'd they come? Many of the lamas teach that text to their students and to different monks and stuff, and they don't draw such a huge audience. It doesn't mean that they're teaching something worse. I don't mean it that way. But why these hundreds of lamas and monks came to hear Lama Zopa talk is because they said, oh, because he's speaking from his experience. So when we talk about compassion and love and wisdom and generosity and patience and all these lofty ideas, those are not that hard. There are many, many, many lamas who teach that, and teachers who teach that. But somehow when they come into the presence of certain teachers, like His Holiness Dalai Lama and other great teachers, and also it doesn't have to be famous ones. There are many humble, quiet, private monks and lamas that are in seclusion that if you go and sit with them, you have this, if you have the connection, you have a similar experience. So one time with my parents, somehow they just liked Lama. Everyone kind of connected with him from what I could see. So one time, I often, excuse me, because I do tell this story frequently, but it's powerful for me, is that in about 1977, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zomershi were teaching a course down in outside Palm Springs in Yucca Valley. And they were here for a month, and I had just returned to try and get this degree and in order to organize so I can go back to Nepal, back to Kopan. And so my parents had met him a few times. They lived in Los Angeles. So I asked Lama if they'd like to come out, drive out from LA and maybe have a cup of tea with him. And he said, sure, sure, let's invite them for lunch. And my brother, who was a very first introduction to Buddhism, was also at this course. And he doesn't mind me saying, but he was full into his drug addiction. He was a drug addict for many years. But he's also a very spiritual person. So he was coming to this course with, I mean, a lot of interest in Buddhist teachings. So we organized this lunch, and so coming to lunch, and my brother came, and my mom and dad and I came, and we're sitting there having lunch, and we're there for like an hour, couple hours, and I'm getting very anxious because I've organized this lunch, and my mom and Lama are talking about orchids, and then my dad and Lama are talking about business. How business is done in Asia. My dad was a businessman. How business is done. My dad's was. Then my mom and Lama start talking about cooking. Lama loved to cook. So they're talking about different recipes. Then I can hear my dad and Lama talking about some science stuff. And then they're talking about Tibet, and politics. And my brother's very quiet, and I'm like going, oh my God, I completely wasted Lama Yeshe's time, you know? Going, oh, what did I do? It's like, and I'm thinking, come on, Lama, zap them, right? Do something. Get in so they get it. Anyway, kind of ends like that, and then the lunch ends, and they're saying their goodbyes, and my mom says, I mean, for a mother to say this, to me is so touching, and it's Mother's Day today, and she said, "Oh, Lama, you've helped Karuna so much. Now will you please help him?" And points to my brother, right? So Lama walks over to him, my brother, and I'm trying to grow a beard. Sorry about this. 45 years later. He, Lama grabs my brother's beard and pulls him right to like here. And Lama says to her, he says, okay, you okay with that? And my brother's like, it's intimidating. So we leave from there, walking down the hallway, and I'm going, God, I just wasted Lama's time. We had this great opportunity, 3 hours of lunch, tea, I had such a chance. My dad, who's a rational guy, no, my mom turns to me, something. I don't know, but if there's such a thing as a Buddha, he's it. I can remember standing in that hall, my mom saying that with this kind of glow on her face. And my dad turns and goes, yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, he's really a genius, isn't he? Which is his highest compliment. My brother says, well, when Lama grabbed my beard, he had me up there, and his face transformed into Jesus' face. So here I was, with this formula like zap 'em. But he knew what he was doing, right? Because his presence, right? Lama wasn't doing anything but being Lama. He was just living in his actualization of his attainments, which is what and that's what he constantly shared because of his devotion to communicating with people. He didn't like all of a sudden turn his face into Jesus, or he wasn't there, right? So the the job of our in Buddhist teachings, I mean, it's so vast, but really, it's kind of like it's kind of like multiple personalities. It's like developing multiple personality order rather than disorder. Because the view is that the personality that we believe who we are is not who we are. And our problems stem from this strong adherence, this strong commitment, this strong belief that however I describe myself is who I am, right? Even when we're humble or if we have this belief. And in Buddhist thought, the fundamental difference between an awakened being is just that, non-awakened. An awakened being awakens to the understanding of their identity. It's as simple as that. An unawakened being is a person who believes their identity as being true. Okay, that's all. And so the carving away at that belief is what the Buddhist practice is, really. So you want to talk about meditation, meditation is about that. So meditation is not about, let's talk about meditation. I have this, here we go. Okay. By the way, Lama Yeshe did pass away in 1984. He was only 49 years old, so he was quite young when he passed away. He was a true yogi in the Buddhist tradition. We believe that the highest, well, it's not the right way to say it. Many of the highest realized meditators or yogis are completely hidden. They hide their attainments. They seem ordinary. And it only takes a little bit of time. If you hang around them a little bit, it kind of seeps out. They can't completely hide it. But I think one of the profound uh, points of view that really struck me when I first transitioned from Hinduism to Buddhism was this hidden quality. It would seem that the more higher their qualities, the more humble they were, the more hidden they were, more ordinary they were. Like I said, they can't completely hide it. You hang around them long enough, it seeps out, because of that presence, right? But so I think it's very important to be very discriminating, with teachers. I think we should be discriminating, especially in this day and age. Um, so one of the biggest things, let's see if I can find I messed up because I put on here, I didn't put page numbers. Okay, so meditation. So Lama often talked about the purpose of meditation, and we could have this discussion. We should have, because I'm doing all the talking. I mean, what is meditation, do you think? What is meditation, really? Yangchen, what is meditation? She teaches it on the morning. Okay, okay, okay. Oh yeah, that's not fair, right? It's kind of like be like a tag team kind of thing, right? No. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'm intimidated. What is meditation? No wrong answers. Remember? Silence of the mind. I can repeat also. Silence of the mind. What is meditation? Being in the present moment, finding your true self,
Letting go of your thoughts.
letting go of your thoughts. 30 minutes. I sit in the morning, the legs fall asleep. Okay.
That.
Yeah. Anybody else? A way to get to know yourself. Did you read the book? Um, Identify my delusions. Yeah. Awareness. Caring for the mind. I like all these answers. Attempting to see things as they are. Why? So I'm not stuck in seeing things as I'm just repeating for the so I'm not stuck in seeing things as they aren't. What's the problem with seeing things as they aren't? It hurts. It can be an illusion, yeah. Create suffering. Yeah, I think it's a lot of all of that. It's like why sit for 30 minutes in the morning and have your legs go to sleep? Why do you do it? You do? You ask yourself that? Okay. For all the reasons that people say. Yeah, so you've studied already a little bit, or some, or a lot, maybe, right? Um, so there's different motivations or different kinds of meditations for coming in. I want to just read something here if I can find it. Well, first of all, Lama talks about, um, and what I want to do is I want these ideas to be Lama's, not mine, but I'm just trying to give commentary, my feeling about what Lama is trying to express, okay? But Lama said it's the way to realize the nature of the mind. That's quite unusual. Because if you, in terms of sort of common knowledge, meditation would be focusing on the breath, awareness, um, knowing my delusions. Well, that's be the nature of the mind. So, why realize the nature of the mind? I mean, c- but yeah. So you know the nature of your mind because you're stuck with it. That's actually true too, right? But what is that going to do? What is knowing the nature of one's mind going to do? It's like, okay, so I'm really confused today and I'm really angry so the nature of my mind is anger and confusion. How does that help? To understand your reactions better? Why? So you don't cause harm to others. I don't care if I cause harm to others, as long as I'm happy, right? So, so you're, yeah?
Well, maybe then getting you happy would be necessary in the process of
Yeah. Getting me happy,
yeah,
I should know the nature of my mind. Is that,
sustaining happiness if you're not already.
but isn't that unusual? That's not usually what we hear about meditation, is it? That, in effect, is a spiritual path. Yeah, I'm using that in the positive sense. That to me is the meaning of a spiritual path, is to develop one's potential, right? That's my, I'm not saying only me, but that's kind of what I've settled on as a definition of a spiritual path. Unusual, huh? So if someone says, what's your definition to me, what's your definition of a spiritual path? I have to say over many, many years of thinking about it, it's the process of developing my inner potential. Okay. So if you see someone meditating, are they on a spiritual path? I'm talking about if you see someone sitting and meditating, are they on a spiritual path? No, not necessarily. How will you know if they're on a spiritual path? The presence, but at some point you probably have to ask them. The way? By interacting with them. So part of that is presence, but I don't trust totally you know, my radar on presence yet. But um, I'd have to ask them too. Why are you meditating? So there's a story, a famous story about, oh gosh, John, he's gonna tell me I'm gonna get this wrong probably again. So I think it was, so there was, so John, if you can answer the story of, was it Atisha or Jontompa that was circumambulating the Joa in Tibet, in Lhasa, when he came upon a man who was reciting prayers. at the Joe at this well the temple. Was it Atisha or John Tompa? He's looking at me like John Tompa. Yeah, yeah. So so John Tompa was going around with some of his students around there and saw this man making prayers to, and so John Tompa asked him what he was doing. He says, "Well, I'm practicing Dharma," and he said, "He's practicing. Yeah, I'm practicing. I mean, I'm reciting prayers." My practice. And John Tompa said to him, "It's very good to recite prayers, but it'd be better if you practice the Dharma." And so he was. So next day, so this man became a bit confused. So the next day, I believe, John, I don't give me an exam on telling it wrong, okay? So so the next day, so he's coming around and he sees the man. John Tompa sees the same man, and this time he's circumambulating the Joa in the temple. And so John Tompa asks, "What are you doing now?" And he says, I'm practicing. I'm by circumambulating." And John Tompa says to him, "Well, I think it's better if you practice the Dharma." So he's getting confused, right? So next day he comes around and he's circumambulating. The man is sitting, I think he's meditating. And he's meditating. John Tompa says to him, "It'd be really good if you practice the Dharma." And he said, finally the guy gets out so frustrated. He says, "First, I'm reciting prayers. You tell me practice Dharma. Second, I'm circumambulating this temple. Now you say practice Dharma. Thirdly, and now I'm trying to meditate. You say practice the Dharma. What do you mean? And what am I supposed to do?" And so John Trumpa says, just give up the goals and happiness of this life. Meaning, why he was doing those practices. Okay? So whether we look at the mind or don't look at the mind, whether we focus on our breath or don't focus on our breath, it all has to do with the motivation. And the motivation is what? What is the right? So that's what determines. So when we see people, right, you can't just really rely on their presence because I have my own blockages. I have to also ask them, well, why are you doing that? And then in terms of Buddhist practice, in terms of this tradition, why we do something has different levels of motivation. All those levels of motivation don't define it as a religious or spiritual practice. Okay? And in fact, if I begin really sort of orthodox, practicing, okay, this is going to be a little bit disturbing. So if we practice meditation I need to calm my mind down, right? I need a calmer mind. Is that the practice of spirituality? Oh, ah. Do you ask the person that? Or you just go, oh, good, you're calming your mind. Or I'm trying to develop concentration. Okay? That's often what we hear, right? Right? Or if the person says, well, I'm trying to attain enlightenment. We can't just take these things on face value, right? We say, what do you mean? How is that helping you attain enlightenment? Well, I need a calm mind. Well, yeah, you do need a calm mind. Why do you need a calm mind right now? Do you know? Maybe it's that you need a disturbed mind, right? Right? A disturbed mind could be the thing that propels your development further, faster. But none of us like a disturbed mind, do we? So why are you meditating? To have a calm mind? To be happy in this moment, basically. I mean, that's the brutal truth. That is not the practice of spirituality. Sorry. It doesn't mean it's bad, right? It doesn't mean it's positive because it's better than being angry and being upset. But you can't define that as a practice of developing one's potential. It's positive, yes. It could be a stepping stone to it. But it in and of itself, it all depends on the motivation. It all depends on why your mindset of when we're doing it. That determines whether that's a spiritual practice or not. Not whether your legs are falling asleep or not. Now my legs fell asleep after a half hour instead of 20 minutes. My practice is developing, right? It doesn't mean like that. And again, it does. What I'm trying to say is that what's happened in our modern world, and I see it a lot, is anything positive seems to be then categorized as like spiritual development, not anything positive. That's a sweeping generalization. But in the realm of spirituality, mindfulness, right? Mindfulness is a spiritual practice, right? Right? Ah, I got people now. That's what Rinpoche said. Lama Rinpoche once, what did he think of mindfulness practice? And his answer was mindfulness of what? Okay, when you train to be a sniper in the military, you develop huge focus and awareness and mindfulness, right? You have to. Okay. Same with someone in the military, who's, I don't know, disarming bombs. You better have a lot of, or in whoever's doing that job. Also, when we work, a lot of times we're extremely focused. How about a surgeon? How about a surgeon? You have to be focused, right? Is that a spiritual practice? No. It might be good, right? It's positive. So we're making a distinction between good and positive. Um, okay. It's all about me, and I should make about Lama. Well, Lama says, well, you can think, okay, Buddhism always talks about suffering. This turns some Westerners off. Quote, we're happy. We're not suffering. What's our problem? Why should we listen to teachings on suffering? End of quote. Lama says, well, you can think in that way if you like. But in fact, if you check more deeply into how your mind functions in everyday life, you'll realize how dissatisfied you are and how up and down your uncontrolled mind really is. That up and down itself is suffering. That's all. It's very simple. We have hundreds and thousands of pages on suffering. We really do. Outlines and outlines and outlines on the nature of suffering. When Buddha taught, so when Buddha was, after he attained awakening, a full enlightenment, he just had a conclusion that I can't express this to any. It's beyond expression, right? It's beyond words. So he wandered around for 7 weeks, and people, his previous disciples, different, were asking him, please, to teach. I think even the gods were asking him, the devas were asking him to teach. And finally, after 7 weeks, he was, uh, I think through his disciples, 5 disciples, was convinced that it would be good to teach. So the first thing he taught was what? After a full enlightenment, endless eons of practice, or countless eons, sitting under the Bodhi tree, 6 years of an ascetic lifestyle before that, eating just 3 grains of sesame grains or something like that a day. What did he teach first? What's the first thing he taught? He taught suffering. Why that? So he taught the Four Noble Truths. The first truth being everything is in the nature of suffering, or beings are in the nature of suffering. He taught that first. He taught about the causes of suffering. And the third one was there's a release, there's nirvana, there's liberation. Why didn't he teach that one first? I mean, really, why didn't he teach in the Four Noble Truths? First thing he taught is one can attain nirvana. It'd be so much more encouraging, right? You might feel more inspired. Why did he teach suffering one first, though? It's almost like now in our modern age, we teach the nirvana one first, don't we? You know, I think this is my little bit of one of my um, little bit hesitations or one of my disappointments about the way the Dharma is being expressed, Buddhist Dharma in this modern world, is we seem to be teaching the things that people like and afraid to teach the things that people find difficult or offensive, or right. I have many, many, many friends, students, acquaintances and they're really into, I'm not going to mention the names, but they're interested in certain parts of the Buddhist teachings that are all about nirvana, enlightenment, and emptiness. I can't say their level of development, that might be where they need to be. But it seems to me that as soon as I start asking them something, they don't have any clear understanding about, well, what's just the nature of our reality? Why do you want nirvana? So Buddha taught the nature of suffering because I believe, because if you don't know the nature of the thing you're in, how can you get out of it? And if you don't know the nature of the thing you're in, how can you be motivated? What's the motivation for getting? So really, I look at a lot of my friends who are interested in these really esoteric teachings that are in the Buddhist, more esoteric teachings that are, and these are, I'm talking about people maybe not so well studied, and I look at them, I mean, I listen to them, and if I ask them, well, what's the nature of your mind? What's the nature of the situation, and why, right? When you study to be trained as a therapist, anyone here have any psychology backing training? That's good. Oh, that's right. Teresa does. Weren't we taught you don't ask why to clients? Isn't that ridiculous? Yeah. Clients, don't ask them why. I'm feeling depressed. Don't ask why. Yeah.
They're afraid to start with the suffering.
Afraid to start with the suffering?
Suffering because of so and so.
Right.
Starting to help or like other things.
It's hopeful. Yeah. Yeah, I think that Lama Yeshe would agree with you that start yeah, also to be more hopeful. Um, I don't think there's anything wrong. For sure, Lama didn't come on with suffering. Lama Zopa Rinpoche did. He'd have my 1978, the November course. No, yeah, 1978. We have an annual in Copan, a very famous November course, we call it. And I was at the eighth one in 1975. And it wasn't the eighth November course, but anyway, now, because we're given twice a year for a while. But anyway, and now we're up to, I don't know what, 50th or something, 54. I don't remember. And but one of the course, 1978, Lama Zopa Rinpoche teaches the course. And Lama Yeshe would come in and give guest appearances and that sort of thing. And and uh, that 1 month course in November, Lama Zopa taught on suffering, particularly the suffering of the three lower realms, the hell realm, spirit realm, animal realm, for 3 weeks. People were going crazy. I was one of the managers of I was manager of the course, and they were coming to me and complaining. Can't you teach him how to teach? He doesn't know how to teach. He's just going to repeats himself over and over and over again. Lama Zopa knew completely what he was doing. But Lama Yeshe then would come in the evening and give this whole pep talk and talk about enlightenment, nirvana, one's potential. So it's not really an either or, it's a both and. My gripe is that my gripe is both. Only suffering in that part, yeah, I have a problem with. I think that's not the most skillful thing. But the other one, which is happening now in our culture or this modern world, is all about Mahamudra, Dzogchen, emptiness. These very profound, very very the attainments. Great for people to hear them. They have to hear them. And I think our culture is, or modern day, we know we kind of need that sort of approach. But you can't approach those without then going into the dirt. You have to go into the dirt. You have to. And it's ugly. And it's painful. And the reason people don't do it is because it's ugly and painful. Doesn't mean you don't do it. I mean, is it a problem when there's all this dirt under your bed? I was thinking, is that a problem? Can you say your house is clean if you've just swept everything under the bed? All the dead insects and the. Anyway, you get my point. All right. So, well, Lama said, the mind is always up and down. That is the nature of suffering, okay? Because if it's always up and down, the nature of suffering, now this is very clear. It doesn't have much to do with one's physical pain, okay? Or even well, emotional pain it does. What it has to do with is that there's nothing that is reliable. We are, our minds are constantly up and down. That is a very different definition, uncommon definition of the nature of suffering. I would say if you want to ask anybody, I mean, any, like Lama or, knowledgeable person, what is suffering? Eventually you'll get, oh, it's the mind. Well, first you will get, it's the mind that's suffering. It's not the world. It's not the politics. It's not the environment. It's not climate change. It's not um, illness. All those things are terrible. But the only reason whether they're suffering or not, this is really, 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 this is the essence. Whether it's suffering or not is how they affect your mind. So is climate change suffering? Yongchen says yes. Is climate change suffering? What if your mind, huh? From its own side. Okay. If it affects you, yes. So if it affects you, okay, now we get to the essence. If it affects you, how does it affect you? How does that happen? I mean,
Like the pollution that you mentioned.
yeah,
So it's because of the changes.
right. So I got kind of, I don't want to say sick, but yeah, what happened is Kathmandu is very polluted. But what really got me was they sometimes burn trash and they throw plastic in the trash. And I was up at the monastery and I couldn't get away from the smoke. It was just somehow all pervasive going, so I could feel that it was getting into my lungs or into my throat like that. And I got like a cold. I still have it. And okay, so so pollution is suffering, right? Right?
Physically,
Physically, I'm having an effect, a condition. Is that suffering?
if it is extended for a long time and
So if I get cancer from this, then it's suffering. But before that, it's not suffering, is what you're saying.
degree of
So it is suffering in the beginning, just smaller suffering. I hope you don't mind if I uh, interact. Sometimes people get offended, so I go, no, no, I didn't mean it that way. Yeah,
It seems like
yeah.
you're
I'm debating.
yeah,
I hope I'm dialogue anyway. Yeah, but I can I can make that mistake. People could misunderstand me, so I'm checking first. We're okay? Okay. So so it's interesting because at what point is it suffering then? When I inhaled it, is it suffering then?
can't be yourself or you're unable to do certain things because of that suffering.
Oh,
Same as my
yeah.
where
Thank you,
it is
Tyler.
affecting
Yeah, thank you. Just repeat the last part you said. So,
would say it is suffering when it
my mic is not on, I think. Yeah,
no,
yeah. Now it
um,
is.
so it is suffering when it's affecting your day to day
Uh-huh.
and you're not able to perform to the potential or how you were like working in the normal.
So, right. So if got to the point where I had to stay in bed, then it's suffering.
Yes.
But the day before that's not suffering.
And for example, if normally you would take miles walk daily,
Uh-huh.
but now because of the condition you are only able to do say half a mile.
Ah, so the suffering is dependent on how far I can walk.
Basically it's affecting your day.
Okay, I have a question for you. Of course I do, right? When I was taking care of Lama Yeshe became very, very ill. I was taking care of him before he passed away. A couple months we were in seclusion in Delhi, New Delhi. And he had a severe heart condition. And he was at times, I think he was in extreme pain. And he said to me, he going like this, I'm okay. He said, I'm okay. I did my best. So the point is that the point is that there was a time Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche were teaching in Boston. It was many years ago. And over the weekend, they went on a little bit of a holiday, outside one of the students had a house. Actually, I think it might have been on Walden Pond, but anyway, nearby. And they were out at his lake house, and they really and it was warm, and so they went into the pond or the lake to swim. There were about, I don't know, several students there as well. So as they were paddling around and wading around, so someone kind of goes, "Oh, where's Lama Zopa?" They couldn't see Lama Zopa, and they got, "Where's Rinpoche?" And then someone saw, like, off in the distance, a hand just above the water going like this, right? So someone, oh, it's Rinpoche. So this one Tim swam over, and Rinpoche was drowning, right? And he rescued him, and Rinpoche came up and was laughing. And it wasn't that nervous laugh. He just thought it was amusing, even in death, right? That's not suffering. That's the definition of suffering, the state of the mind. Okay? And uh, yes, when the Buddha taught the first noble truth of suffering, he gave all these lists and outlines, things like the body is a nature, sickness is suffering. But he didn't really mean sickness. Okay, death is suffering, birth is suffering, aging is suffering. Did I say sickness? Sickness is suffering. Is that four? Okay. Separating from things that you like to have is suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering. He gave eight different definitions or points. Okay, I just gave six, I think. Is that really suffering? Is that? It's not. He gave those outlines because what he was saying is it's very difficult to control your mind when you're sick. It's very difficult to control your mind when you're dying. It's very difficult to control your mind when you're being born, although hard to remember that. It's very difficult to control your mind while you're aging. These are conditions that will affect most people's minds. That's what he meant. But for the practitioner, the yogi, the practitioner is able to go into those states and not be affected. Why? Because she or he has taken control of the mind. So it's the relationship of the mind with that event that defines it as suffering or not. Not that I got the smoke in my lungs. You would have to be with me and interview me to see what my mood was like, right? And that's the real essence. And you can judge people's spiritual development by how they do in those circumstances, because those circumstances are not going to disappear. And we keep trying to get them to disappear. That's our approach to happiness. Get those things to disappear. And people hate it when you say, you have to deal with it. And we have to have empathy, of course, and compassion. But now, what we're doing though, is that it's all in the context, and this is really important. Is a person a spiritual practitioner or not? That is what we have to determine. Okay. Is the person you're dealing with a spiritual practitioner or not? With my mother, with my mother, when she started getting dementia or doing the other thing, it would have been, it would have been unkind, non-compassionate for me to try and push on her, Mom, control your mind. It's just your mind. That is not compassion. Okay? That is spiritual materialism. That is arrogance. What would be compassion? Holding my mom's hand, joking around with her. She loved humor. You know, that was her according to her capacity. Okay? Something that a more developed beings can see is a person's capacity. So Lama Yeshe in that lunch understood each of my father, my mother, my brother's capacity and went right to their and then a little bit higher, right? They go to their level a little bit higher. But how does he do that? How did he do that? How did he do that? I'm asking. Where's the microphone? Anybody? So he's having lunch. I'm having lunch with him. I'm getting agitated, and he's not. He communicates the thing that helps them attain an insight. And that insight will be not just like a therapy insight. That's an insight that builds on their inner development. Maybe lifetimes later. Who knows? How did he do that? Now that,
Maybe because he met them at their level with his experience and his practice.
right. He met them at their level with his experience and his practice. So what was his experience and practice, do you think? I mean, we're just having a conversation. It's not like a test. Yeah, yeah. What was his experience and practice?
I think what I have always been amazed by is it's like a confidence in the other person's ability. So I don't know, is that their
Yeah, be,
practice?
e- I would say if I'm hearing what you're saying, one of the things that I feel is their quality, these beings' quality, is they're focused on developing their inner potential, which we call their enlightened nature, right? Their Buddhahood that we all have the potential for. To the degree that they're focusing on themselves. Interesting. I want to say that because we think all focusing on ourselves is selfish or arrogant or an ego trip. It's not, right? You have to focus on yourself, but in the right way. So the more in touch, I think Lama Yeshe and Lama's open Lama Yeshe was was more and more in touch with his Buddha nature, his potential. And I think his potential had developed immensely. Did it develop fully to light at the level of a Buddha or the first level? I don't know. It doesn't matter because any of that is profound. So what he was looking at in my mom and my brother and my father and me and every single person he met was he was communicating with their potential. Because if I said exactly the same words that Lama said to my mom and my dad and my brother, it wouldn't have that effect. It's an ego trip too. You can see people trying to, I know. So, so why would the exact same words? So it's not the words, it's the presence. And the presence in this context, or in this, is the presence of communicating with each person's Buddha potential, awakened potential. And no one in your life, I will tell you, at least for me, has ever done that except them. And the closest one to do that is my mother, right? Somehow there's some kind of chemical, electrical, karmic connection with our moms and dads, that they have that kind of beyond, I'm generalizing, but they have that beyond what you think you are potential. They see you more than how you might see yourself. Of course, theirs is confused and but it's also true conditional love and compassion. But when uh, when one's potential starts to awaken, you don't have to do any. I'm not saying you don't practice, of course you do, but you don't have to actually do much about the other guy or girl because the other guy or girl becomes very superficial and unsatisfying. It's kind of like it's kind of like the difference between me saying what Lama said and Lama saying what he said. For me, it's just a superficial thing. I might mean well, but for Lama to say those things and experience those things, Lama used to, again, John, I'm deferring to him, and if you want to validate, John was there. You know, I spent very, 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 very fortunate that I spent 9 years working and living at Kopan, which was where the home, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa's home. They weren't always there, but somehow I don't know how this luck, unbelievable luck that I had, and um, anything that I have achieved or attained is directly related to that relationship, not through study and not through meditation, because I don't do, it's hard to do those things. But the thing with Lama Yeshe is I would try and run away from him, honestly. So my relationship with Lama, I think John even asked Lama when my relationship with Lama was he wasn't nice to me. He wasn't nice at all. In 9 years, he gave me one compliment, honestly. And yet I was hopelessly addicted to him. I think in a good way. Why? How does that work? So that from that very first morning when I was going to leave for the States, and he asked me, and I asked him, so now what do I do, Lom? And he gave me that thing. It's like I often call the wrathful wrinkle. It's like forehead, like that thing that you do when someone does something you don't approve of, like that. That was 9 years of that, except for one compliment I did in the 9 years. Maybe I'll tell you the compliment at some point. So, why? He was very stern with me. He was very strict. I sometimes would see him coming and I'd go the other way. I just couldn't deal with it. Yeah, and in fact, the monks, little monks, also, you hear him clop, clop. He wore what are those shoes? Those the kind of they had the Dr. Scholl's, I think they, and he loved those. And but you could hear him come down from his room in the monas on top of the temple, and clop, 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 and all the monks would run, and I'd be sitting there, and I'd start running too, because Chogyam Trungpa said, one of the great Kargyu lamas, teachers, said the purpose of the guru is to insult you. Okay, we got to be careful if who that guru, if he or she is really qualified. You don't just accept insult. It's only if a very deep relationship and a very trust that takes years to develop, not instantly, ever. Um, and he also said that the guru is like a freight train. You can't stop them. They take 5 miles to break. So Lama was relentless and powerful. Most people saw him as the emanation of love and warmth and affection. I could see that. He had a way of coming right up to you like the Dalai Lama, and you just immediately felt this affection and this love and this warmth. We didn't find a clip, did we? Oh, we did. Yeah, how long is it? Well, I talk so darn much. What do you want? Three or let's do the three. Yeah, people must be sick of listening to me. Are they going to be able to see it too? Okay. 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I free. Oh, is this is a question someone's asking? Okay.
I mean, it's par for the course. That's what we're doing. That's what.
That's okay.
I kind of think he just acknowledged that the guy was doing what everybody else is doing, and that's what we're all doing here.
Mhm.
That sounds right. That sounds like checks out. And all those experiences track for my experiences too.
Yeah. Like it was okay.
Yeah.
You're on the right track if you haven't got these huge realizations and insight. Yeah. But you see, one thing to point out, I mean, in that little clip, do you see that? I mean, I imagine all of us were a little surprised initially by Lama's answer. Good, good. Do you see? That has to do with not some sort of performance. That has to do with his presence, connecting with that person in the audience. It wasn't an intellectual, okay, I'll say this. Or nothing, none of that is intellectual. In fact, when we activate that awakening part of our mind, the awakening mind, everything is really, in a way, we could say spontaneous. You know, your intellect is not suppressed; it's actually activated. But you're coming from direct experience rather than conceptual base. You know what I mean? Direct. It's similar to like a mother's reaction to if her child's in some sort of danger. They don't think about, no, maybe I should go to, they just react, right? It's that spontaneity, but it's spontaneity that arises from the achievement of this awakening mind, which is a mind of wisdom and compassion. Not contrived compassion, not intellectual compassion, not conceptual compassion. It's exactly the same compassion. Does a mother need to think when her child's going close to the stove to think, oh, maybe should I, it might burn him, it might, they don't think. It's natural. That's what we develop. We develop that when we're able to not suppress, when we're able to, eliminate what was referred to earlier as the delusions, the afflictions, the obscurations. So that's where we live. It just by removing that ego attachment stuff, then the natural compassion, wisdom, because they're in there already. So it's not really, I mean, we can develop them, yes, but not, you don't develop them from something that's not there already. It's just they're dormant. And so, yeah, so is clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is just dormant. Clairvoyance is not a big deal. Actually, it's not a big deal at all because the information's there. If you go into a primitive culture with your smartphone and you say it's going to rain tomorrow, they think you're clairvoyant, right? Right? Or if you tell little kids the same thing. But it's just you have access to the information. So when the mind becomes very quiet, much quieter, it has access to this information that's already there. Okay? Okay. What were we going to? Yeah, Teresa.
Just gonna say that I feel like what Lama was communicating there is there's no problem. Everything's okay.
Mm,
Doing fine. It's all perfect. Don't worry. And this, I think, as Westerners, for me anyway, I felt in the beginning like you're not taking me seriously.
right.
This is not good. This is here.
Right.
And then it takes years and years and years to
Yeah.
realize for me, oh, there's nothing to worry about. It's all okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, what we make not okay is okay often, and what we make okay is not okay. Right. So we got a few minutes. This is it's not that long, but let's just if you can just sit for a minute. Um, we can talk about meditation. I didn't get to the other parts that Lama talks about meditation, but if you just gently close your eyes. Main thing is to have your spine, in line with your bottom, just so it's straight, not ramrod or rigid. And then all I want to do is for a couple minutes. I don't want to do anything like don't watch the breath, don't focus, like try to control the mind. What I like is just, yeah, to watch the mind, but in the sense that the mind is can you just identify and watch the movement of the mind so you become familiar with the fact that it's not static. That's all. So your meditation is get to know the mind a little more. And this part of the mind is it's moving moment to moment, okay? Just for a couple of minutes, minute or two. You're just watching. Okay. Okay, so maybe next week we'll do a little longer. Um, about lineage. In the beginning, we talked about lineage. So I mentioned about the relationship with one's guru is tantamount in this tradition. And I think lineage is like people are, when I think it's about lineage is carried through, I think, experience, right? Practice and experience, not intellectual, not understanding. And then there's a thing with your teacher, your minds will meet. That what I mean, it's just many different levels of that. But you just kind of like he gets me or she gets me, and then you kind of like it's a non-conceptual experience, right, where the minds meet, and it might last a split second. A lot of the practices that we develop in the higher teaching, higher practices and tantra and like that are all about unifying that meeting of the minds. So I think that's lineage, part of what makes lineage. Okay, any other questions, complaints, arguments? Quentin, any questions? No? Don't you hate it when people do that? They ask you, just they point on you. And they say, not anymore? Wow. Great. I used to always sit in the back of the class. Anything else? Okay, so thank you for coming on Mother's Day. And also, to think that, typically when we do any kind of teachings, we also, in the beginning, we motivate, at the end, we dedicate, and I was kind of sloppy, you know. But the main one thing to think about is dedication really means is that this time we spent together, let's hope that it furthers the development of our awakening mind, right? Because in that development of our own awakening mind, for what? Is to be of even better service to others and helping them subdue the neurotic, bipolar minds that we live in. Okay? That's the real suffering. So we dedicate to that and then it's not wasted. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. And then I think we're here next week, right? Same. Okay. Oh, wow.